Hello again, Steve here with a few comments I'm going to ramble on about, which is going to be a continuation of a video I did about a week ago called the Keto Diet, or comments on the Keto Diet, something like that. And this one's going to delve more into the vegan side of things, because I see a lot of things on the internet right now which are slamming the vegan diet. And I think it's a response to sort of what the new right, young people on the new right, somehow are glomming on to Jordan Peterson's comments about eating all meat diets, and this guy who was shot up in Mexico who held all meat, you know, meetups and whatnot, meetups eating meat. So there's a lot. There's always there's this movement towards eating meat that somehow that's more of a manly thing to do or whatever. And of course the pushback is all those crazy liberals. They're the vegans and so on, and they want to. It's all a conspiracy to get us off of the real food and make us all weak and soy boys and everything else. Well, I mean, here's the thing, folks. First of all, I'm not going to say anything authoritative here. I'm no nutritionist, but I do have a fair number of years, 30 years of experience of actually being mostly a vegan, a plant-based diet, I call it. And, I've written a book on it, Optimum Health, although it's not a vegan book. And I've been told that it's one of the best books ever written on that. Hard to find now, though. It's out of print, called Optimum Health. And, in terms of how healthy I am, well, I'm over 50 years old, and a couple of years ago, I walked 8,000 kilometers carrying a backpack, living mostly on oatmeal, and, did it in world record time. At least nobody's ever been able to prove otherwise for what I did, for the actual trek I did. Completely unsupported. And so I guess it would come down to compared to what? Somebody could say, oh, I'm a vegan and it's a terrible idea, and, I had bad skin, and I was losing weight, and I was getting bad teeth and whatever. Well, I had people before. I'll give you an example, and once again, it's just an anecdote, but it doesn't mean much, but it's an example. I was at a social event one time, and there was this lady there, a fat woman, and she was talking about, oh yeah, the vegan diet doesn't work for me. I was on that for a year or whatever, and I was gaining weight, and I was in poor health and whatever. And I really didn't have a comment because honestly, I have no idea what you're eating, lady. Honestly, I don't. Here's the thing. Somebody could eat Oreo cookies, potato chips, and drink soda pop all day. And yeah, that's a vegan diet. But who the hell in their right mind is going to say that's a healthy diet? Maybe the healthiest part of it is the potato chips, but God help us. That's not very, very healthy, right? So one of the things I notice with a lot of the information I see out there of the people slamming the whole vegan or vegetarian diet and so on, is they're using a lot of anecdotes. And of course, I'm not using a lot more here either. But you know what? We have to up our game a little bit if we really want to educate ourselves and look at the research. Look at what humanity, large populations ate for thousands of years. What did people in really, really tough times actually try to get so to give them some good nutrition? I don't know if you ever heard of the barley men. Okay, as an example, these were the gladiators. These were guys who were competitors in the bread and circuses shows of the late stage Roman Empire, who would go up at a life and death fight against another guy. They called themselves the barley men. Why? Because what they had to get a hold of was a bunch of barley. If they could fill their bellies with barley for a few days, they had some stamina. And let me tell you, my body, when I walked that distance on oatmeal, was so amazingly strong that I could actually drive my body to, I don't know what, it didn't seem to have a limit to it. I remember an old saying that I heard on a conversation one time about the British Special Forces, the SAS. And one of these trainers was talking about how what they discovered in training these guys through their long hikes through the Hebrides and stuff like that is when they would get a guy to completely break down physically, couldn't push him anymore. If you get him through that window of possibility and he was healthy enough to going into it, he was only 10% of his capability. And that's the amazing aspect of the human body when we break through it. But provided it's healthy, provided that we've got something behind it. And the barley men learned that. The barley men realized that when they fed themselves starch, folks, that's it. It's not your frickin' Twinkies and your Coca-Cola and stuff like that. It's real stuff. Starch. This has been fairly debated and it's a fairly strong theory. It's one of the reasons why we have such a strong, big brain and a powerful brain, we human beings, is because for something like 13 or 15,000 years, our main source of calories has been starch. And starch is brain food. That's what we actually need, is brain food, right? And a lot of these vegetarians and vegans and so on who go on this for a few years, they don't have a clue what they're doing. They're eating a bunch of salads. I get this all the time. There's so much misinformation out there about this. I remember lots of times, this happened numerous times. I never tell people, okay, what my diet is socially. Because it gets people all worked up and they gotta cook something different and make a big salad and all that sort of stuff. There's always stuff to eat at every barbecue. I'll eat the baked potato, that's fine. Anyways, I was at this one barbecue one time and somebody finally asked me, in all honesty, and this wasn't just one time, this has happened many times. So you're a vegetarian, are you? And, well, I mean, who told you that? I mean, I don't go around telling people that. No, I eat a plant-based diet, and I eat basically what I want. That's what I want to eat because it nourishes me well. And the question then was, well, how do you survive on salads? Or how do you survive on vegetables? And I usually troll people a little bit, and it's actually partly true. My response is, I really don't like vegetables. At which point they're asking, what the hell do you eat? Like you don't eat eggs, you don't eat dairy, and you don't eat meat and everything, and you don't eat vegetables. What the hell do you eat? Well, I eat some real dense food. I eat what has served humanity for tens of thousands of years. I eat starch and, I eat grains and legumes primarily. Starch-based thing and a legume-based thing. And I'll get to that in a minute. There's lots of research. I mean, researchers have gone back for a long time. People studying the ancient cultures. What did they live on? What did the profound, sort of strong cultures of the past, where we find pyramids, we find structures, and we find large civilizations and so on, what did they eat? Well, I don't know if you ever heard of, I think it's John McDougall. I'm just going to look this up here. Just give me a second. And John McDougall, in his book, or he's talking about, Dr. John McDougall, he's got a thing called the McDougall Newsletter. And this one thing I'm reading from is, I'm looking at my computer, Introduction to New McDougall book, The Starch Solution. Okay, so here's what he wrote in one paragraph then. The most important evidence supporting my claim that the natural human diet is based on starch is simple observation that you can easily validate yourself. All large populations of trim, healthy people throughout verifiable human history have obtained their bulk of calories from starch. Examples of once thriving people including Japanese, Chinese, and other Asians eating sweet potatoes, buckwheat, and or rice. Incas in South America eating potatoes, Mayans and Aztecs in Central America eating corn, the Egyptians in the Middle East eating wheat. There have been only a few small isolated populations of primitive people such as the Arctic Eskimos who lived in extremes of environments who have eaten otherwise. Therefore, scientific documentation of what people have eaten over the past 13,000 years convincingly supports my claim. Now, it's interesting that he talks about the Eskimos because I read not long ago that they are the only people through studies who, when they actually are converted onto a purely junk food diet, their lifespan goes up. So yeah, they ate all they had. They ate whale blubber and I don't know, polar bears or something like that, whatever they could get a hold of, seals and whatnot. But if you take people who eat that and you put them on the Oreos and the potato chips and the Coca-Cola and stuff only, they actually live longer. Their health actually improves. Their teeth don't fall out so quickly and so on. And they had a very, very short lifestyle on that diet. So those who think otherwise, well, I don't know. The evidence doesn't seem to be there. And this research is I mean, people like McDougall, Colin Campbell, Dr. Merkin, Esselstyn, Pritikin, Dean Ornish, and whatnot have been researching this for a long, long time. And a lot of the really good research that I found when I was writing my book goes way back to um, the 50s and so on in during the colonial era, when you had some really, really brilliant researchers out of England primarily and so on, who studied the diets of ancient peoples who ate, high starch diets, and they basically, degenerative diseases didn't exist in these peoples. If they got through the polio and the smallpox and the Ebolas and stuff that would take out a lot of them when they were younger, if they got past those stages, they would live long lives with no heart disease, no cancer, no diabetes, and all this sort of thing that is so chronic today, right? So that's where I think a lot of people go wrong, is they go into this vegan diet eating a lot of processed junk, right? Perhaps, and a lot of salads. I know that with, even my a family member of mine who was constantly complaining about she can't exercise anymore because she hits the wall and stuff like that. And this is somebody who is a health professional, right? And I suggested to her that you're probably not getting enough starch. Like, you shouldn't be hitting the wall. If you're well nourished, you shouldn't be hitting the wall when you go for a walk and getting all kinds of blood sugar spikes. If you're eating complex carbohydrate, because complex carbohydrate, otherwise known as starch, and here in my book I say complex carbohydrate, polysaccharides. Okay, I say, as the title says, these are more complex than simple carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates, in brackets, better known as starch, are formed like chains of sugar molecules hooked together. So I used a picture like this of a whole bunch of links of sugar molecules basically linked together in these different formats, right? And versus simple carbohydrates, which could be in forms of just single or doubles. And what we live on, of course, is blood sugar. I mean, the vilification of sugar is just complete frickin' nonsense, because this is what we live on. If we don't have a proper blood sugar level, which is the fuel for the body, we go into this hitting the wall and head rushes and all kinds of stuff. And when we eat complex carbohydrates, which are linked together and tightly bound to themselves, but also interspersed with lots of fiber, all of that tearing apart process acts as a buffer. So we have this slower uptake and a sort of a controlled uptake into the blood sugar. So as we use the blood sugar, more is coming up. Whereas if we're eating a lot of processed junk and a lot of juices and these sorts of things, and even highly pulverized flour, like you take starch, a wheat kernel, and you pound it up into basically you look at a flour, it's just microscopic little wee pieces. Those are basically almost like sugar molecules in a way. Yes, they get bound together in the baking process again with the gluten and whatever, but nevertheless they separate more easily than when we eat them as more of a whole item, or even as a chewed item. It's sort of more like a pap, and we ran by swallowing it quicker and not processing it into dextrose, more or less, like getting the ensalivation going. That's also part of the digestive process, is chewing a lot. And when we ate more of a whole grain together, then we had to chew more, right? You see people who eat lots of a higher starch diet, they have these large molars. Look at the African people, the Asian people and so on, they got these bigger molars and bigger teeth because they chewed a lot, right? And if you look at history, what it is that people ate a lot, not only did they have, as Campbell was talking about, they had these starches, but they also had a legume. Pretty much all of them. You go into Mexico and you'll find that they use a starch and they'll use a bean, right? And the same in pretty much everywhere we'll use a bean. Like in India, they use a lot of dal, which is, I think, trying to forget what that is. Dal, anyways. This is a little bean anyway. And then mung beans in China and faba beans here and there. Different places use different beans, and when you process those two together, you're getting a starch that comes apart much slower and feeds the body on a much higher level. And it would make sense that why the barley men, why these gladiators in a life and death struggle would want to have the very best fuel. It's like if you're going into a race with your car, you want to put the best fuel in there, right? And the best fuel for the body for energy is starch-based diet. Now, the reason why these keto diets and stuff, all this nonsense keeps rising up, and it all gets associated eventually with health, but it's not, is those are weight loss diets, right? It's quick. People want a quick fix. So any way we can get to starve ourselves and trick our body that we're not starving ourselves, yes, we're going to lose weight, but the question is that healthy, right? And if somebody is obese or fat and they go on a sensible diet, a starch-based diet, and I'll tell you something right now, this book is not a champion of a vegan diet at all. It's a champion of a plant-based diet. In fact, I say in there numerous times, I'm not preaching to anybody to become a vegetarian or a vegan. I'm not telling anybody don't eat meat, don't eat eggs. I will tell people not to eat dairy, because I think there's fairly good evidence that doesn't do really much for us. Although Northern Europeans, their system is more capable of handling it, but certainly Asians might as well stay away from it because they've got no genetic history of eating that. But meats, almost everybody has a history of eating meat. So there's nothing wrong with meat. It's how much is eaten. But it's sort of, if it's more of used as a garnish or a supplement to the bulk of what we want to eat, which is starch, right? And the same with vegetables and fruits and so on. They're like an additive that gives the flavor and the extra fiber and the color and the taste and like all the the spices and all that stuff. It all adds it adds to the enjoyment and adds to the diversity of nutrition, to the micronutrients and so on. But in terms of the macronutrient, the main macronutrient that we need is carbohydrate, because what we run on is blood sugar. And if we need blood sugar, we need to eat sugar. We have to eat sugar. Yes, we can convert fats into sugar, we can convert proteins into sugar, but that's more complex. That's like having to run a refinery at the same time versus eating what we actually need, which is sugar. And the best sugar that we can eat is what we've evolved to eat, which is complex sugar, complex carbohydrates, because the complexity of it acts as a buffer and a slow release, sort of like a pressure reducing valve in a system where you don't want just a whole flood coming out. Because if we eat all kinds of sugar, we get this sugar rush, boom, pumps up into the bloodstream, more than the bloodstream needs at the moment. And what happens is when there's too much of it, we have to get rid of it and store it somewhere. And it overloads the system and eventually leads to reactions that can get us into the diabetic situations. But also what's important to this, as the picture on the back that my wife drew, it's important to be active. We've evolved as creatures who move. And the problem is we're sitting on our asses like I'm doing right now too much of the time. And if we're just eating even healthily and we're sitting on our asses, we're going to start packing it on, right? So if we can find ways to be active, because that's what we're evolved to do, and eat diets that we've evolved eating, which is fundamentally eating a starch-based diet, we're going to be healthier, for sure. And the evidence is very, very clear on this. And the more healthy we are, the greater our quality of life can be. And this is what it's all about, right? I mean, we got to do the work and we got to learn. But once we do, we're going to have less likelihood of chronic diseases and greater level of health and energy in our, early age, middle age, and old age. So how can we argue with that? Steve here again. Great chatting. Great talking. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share. And we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.